Today we're going to compare the differences between every iPhone Apple is currently selling in 2025 to help you decide which iPhone is going to make the most sense for you to buy if you're in the market for a new iPhone this year. So let's begin with the iPhone 16 Pro models, which are the most top-of-the-line and expensive iPhones that you probably don't need. So we have the iPhone 16 Pro that starts at $999, and we also have the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which starts at $1,199. So we have two display size options for the 16 Pros, being the smaller 6.3-inch 16 Pro and the larger 6.9-inch 16 Pro Max. These iPhones feature Apple's most advanced triple lens camera system, featuring 48 megapixel main and ultra-wide lenses and a 12 megapixel dedicated telephoto zoom lens. In addition to capturing the very best photos and videos on any iPhone, you also get 5 times optical zoom thanks to that dedicated telephoto zoom lens. Apple also added a 4K 120 frames per second video recording capability to the 16 Pros, which allows you to capture beautiful 4K high-res slow-motion videos, where slow motion videos on every other iPhone are only at 1080p quality, not 4K. And every iPhone 16 model comes with Apple's latest generation photographic styles, which gives you very granular control over the way your photos will look, both before and after taking the photos, thanks to Apple's new image processing pipeline that they use on all the iPhone 16 models. The 16 Pros feature the very best OLED 120Hz displays, which means the picture on the display of these iPhones can refresh up to 120 times per second, which makes scrolling and animations look extra smooth on these iPhones in comparison to every other iPhone that Apple is currently selling, which all have 60 Hz maximum display refresh rates. The 16 Pros also have an always-on display capability, allowing you to always see your lock screen and notifications at all times, where every other iPhone Apple is currently selling doesn't have an always-on display. The 16 Pros also have the thinnest bezels of any iPhone. They feature titanium sides with a frosted back glass design. The titanium build is exclusive to the 16 Pros here. Every other iPhone Apple is currently selling has an aluminum build, but considering pretty much everybody uses a case on their iPhone, this probably isn't even going to matter. The 16 Pros are powered by Apple's latest and greatest A18 Pro chip with 8 gigs of RAM. Of course, you're getting the most powerful chip ever in an iPhone with so much headroom and power, ensuring a very long lifespan of the device, in addition to plenty of RAM. And the 16 Pros have a USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and a new feature that Apple not only brought to the 16 Pros here, but also to the standard 16s, which we're going to talk about in just a second, is the new clickable and touch-sensitive camera control button that allows you to open up the camera app with just a press, take photos with another press, record videos with a press and hold, and with a double light press, you could swipe through and adjust a handful of camera options such as zoom level, changing between different cameras, exposure, and more. It's honestly nothing groundbreaking, as you can do everything that this button allows you to do, just using the existing on-screen controls that we have on every other iPhone that we've had all along, but at the very least, having a button to quickly open up the camera app and snap photos is nice. Another feature that's available on the 16 Pros here and on the standard 16s is the customizable action button in place of where the mute switch is on older iPhones. You can configure this button to trigger a wide variety of actions and shortcuts, such as launching any application of your choice, for example, which can be quite convenient. And also, Apple Intelligence is available on the 16 Pros here and on the standard 16s, which is Apple's set of AI features built right into all their operating systems that they're currently rolling out piece by piece. It currently includes writing tools for rewriting and proofreading text, notification summaries, a new cleanup feature for removing unwanted things from images, image and emoji generation, and more, with more features coming within the next several months. And while it's nice to see Apple building these now very commonly used AI features right into iOS, almost all these features can be used on any iPhone through the use of third-party apps you can download from the App Store, like ChatGPT, Google Photos, and a host of other apps. So I definitely wouldn't let Apple Intelligence being supported on an iPhone sway your iPhone purchasing decision in any significant way. It's nice having these features built right into iOS on Apple's newest iPhones, but you can easily access this sort of technology on any iPhone through the use of, again, a wide variety of apps you can download from the App Store. And the only real differences between the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max come down to size, battery life, and price. So of course, the smaller 16 Pro has the advantage of being more easily pocketable and comfortable to hold, while the larger 16 Pro Max will be much better for media consumption thanks to its larger display, and it will also have much better battery life thanks to there being a lot more space inside the device for a bigger battery. The smaller 16 Pro will still have very good battery life by pretty much anyone's standards. However, the 16 Pro Max will just have crazy great battery performance. And in terms of price, we have a $200 difference between these two iPhones. Again, the 16 Pro starting at $999 and the 16 Pro Max starting at $1,199. Apple tries to justify this $200 price gap by starting the 16 Pro Max specifically at 256 gigabytes of base storage, storage, where the smaller 16 Pro starts at 128 gigabytes of base storage, just like most other iPhones Apple is currently selling. So you could kind of make the argument that since you're getting double the base storage, it warrants a $200 price difference between these two rather than $100, but again, you can't even get the 16 Pro Max in anything less than 256 gigabytes of storage. The 16 Pros, plainly put, are the very best iPhones money can buy that are probably going to be overkill for what most people actually need, which is a perfect transition into talking about the standard tier iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Plus, which in my opinion are the best overall value iPhones that most people should buy in 2025. So we have the iPhone 16 that starts at $799, and we also have the iPhone 16 Plus, which starts at $899. So very similar to the Pro models, we have two display size options for the standard 16s as well, being the smaller 6.1-inch iPhone 16 and the larger 6.7-inch iPhone 16 Plus. These iPhones feature Apple's latest dual camera system, featuring a 48-megapixel main lens and a 12-megapixel ultra-wide lens. These iPhones take absolutely beautiful photos and videos that are pretty much identical to what you'd get on the 16 Pros. There's only three main differences between the cameras on the standard 16s here in comparison to the 16 Pros. The first of which being the lack of that third dedicated telephoto zoom lens that the 16 Pros have, which gives them 5 times optical zoom, but that isn't even that big of a deal because the standard 16s here have 2 times optical zoom thanks to the very high resolution 48 megapixel main camera lens. And one of the other noteworthy differences is the fact that the ultra wide lens on the standard 16s here is 12 megapixels as opposed to 48 megapixels like it is on the 16 Pros. So your ultra wide shots and super up close macro shots will be a little bit sharper on the 16 Pros in comparison to the standard 16s here, but as you're seeing, it's really not that noticeable when using the default camera settings. And on the standard 16s here, we also don't get 4K 120 frames per second slow motion video recording, as that's only available on the Pros, but you still get slow-mo at 1080p quality, and of course for standard 60 frames per second or less video recording, we have 4K quality on the standard 16s here, in addition to on every other iPhone Apple currently sells actually as well. The standard 16s here also get Apple's latest generation photographic styles, which again gives you much more granular control over the way your photos will look, which is controllable both before and after taking photos thanks to Apple's new image processing pipeline. So there's nothing but great things to say regarding the cameras on the standard 16s. The standard 16s feature very good looking OLED displays with 60Hz display refresh rates, so scrolling and animations aren't going to look quite as smooth as they do on the Pro iPhones, but they'll look plenty smooth and responsive for 99% of users. Honestly, most people I've spoken to don't even notice this difference. You unfortunately don't get an always-on display option for the standard 16s here, meaning you won't be able to have your lock screen and notifications show at all times. The standard 16s feature aluminum sides with a frosted back glass design, which feels quite smooth and premium in the hand. It's nice Apple has brought the frosted back glass texture to the standard tier iPhones for the last couple of years with the 16 series and the 15 series, as opposed to the glossy back glass texture that it was on the standard 14s and earlier. The standard 16s are powered by Apple's latest A18 chip with 8GB of RAM, the A18 chip being Apple's latest gen standard tier iPhone processor. So of course, this processor is going to pack a ton of power and longevity, ensuring a very long lifespan of the standard 16s here. And the fact that the standard 16s here have 8GB of RAM, just like the Pro tier iPhone 16s, make the standard 16s here some of the most future-proofed and powerful standard tier iPhones in recent history. And the standard 16s have a USB-C port for charging and data transfer. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, the standard 16s here do feature the new clickable and touch-sensitive camera control button that allows you to quickly open up the camera app with just a press, take photos with another press, record videos with a press and hold, and with a double light press, swipe through and adjust a handful of camera options. And again, it's nothing that's going to fundamentally change your experience, as everything that this button allows you to do and adjust can be done using the existing on-screen controls that we've had all along. But again, at the very least, it's nice to have a quick button to just open up the camera app and snap photos. You also get the customizable action button on the left side of the device where the mute switch is on older iPhone generations. It is nice being able to configure this button to trigger pretty much any action of your choosing, like launching any app of your choice, for example. And also, Apple Intelligence is available on the standard 16s here, which, as I mentioned a bit earlier, is Apple's set of AI features built right into their products that they're currently rolling out piece by piece. And again, it currently includes writing tools for rewriting and proofreading text, notification summaries, a new cleanup feature for removing elements from images, image and emoji generation, and more, with even more features coming throughout the next several months. And again, while it is nice to see Apple building these very commonly used AI features right into iOS, almost all these features can be used on any iPhone through the use of downloading third-party apps from the App Store like ChatGPT, Google Photos, and more. more. So I definitely wouldn't let Apple Intelligence being on an iPhone or not sway your iPhone purchasing decision in any significant way. And the only real differences between the 16 and 16 Plus come down to size, battery life, and price. Of course, the smaller 16 will be more easily pocketable and more comfortable to hold, and the larger 16 Plus will be much better for media consumption thanks to its larger display, and it will also have better battery life thanks to it having a larger battery, again, due to there just being more space in these larger iPhones to include a larger battery. The smaller 16 will still have incredible battery performance by pretty much anyone's standards, but again, the 16 Plus will just have incredible battery performance that is noticeably better. And in terms of price, we have a $100 difference between these two iPhones. Again, the iPhone 16 is starting at $799, and the iPhone 16 Plus starting at $899, both starting at 128 gigabytes of storage. So I can confidently say that the standard iPhone 16s here are the best overall value iPhones to buy in 2025, as they have everything that 99% of people will need out of their iPhone. And the fact that these iPhones have the brand new A18 processor powering them with 8 gigs of RAM means these iPhones will have incredible longevity in terms of software update support and just general processing power for years and years to come. And moving on to the standard tier iPhone 15 and iPhone 15 Plus. In terms of the Pro tier models for the older iPhone generations like the 15 series and the 14 series, Apple no longer sells those. However, they do still sell the standard tier models of these older iPhone generations. So in terms of the standard 15s, we have the iPhone 15 that starts at $699, and we also have the iPhone 15 Plus that starts at $799. So we have two display size options for the standard 15s here, being the smaller 6.1-inch iPhone 15 and the larger 6.7-inch iPhone 15 Plus. And in my opinion, these iPhones offer a pretty solid value in 2025. If you want to save an extra $100 and opt for a standard 15 model instead of going for a standard 16 model, as the standard iPhone 15s here also have 99% of what most users will need out of their iPhone. The standard 15s also feature a dual camera system featuring a 48 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens, very similar to the standard 16s. And the standard iPhone 15s here take beautiful photos and videos, as you can see. Of course, the biggest visual difference between the standard iPhone 15s and the standard iPhone 16s is the different camera lens orientation on the back, it being diagonal on the 15s and vertical on the 16s. But despite the external looks, these camera systems are actually very similar and produce almost identical photos and videos. The only features you're really missing out on with the cameras on the standard 15s in comparison to the cameras on the standard 16s are the new macro photography capability that the 16s have, which does let you shoot much better quality, super up-close shots. I personally rarely find myself needing to take super up-close shots like this, so you're probably not going to miss this that much. You also don't get Apple's latest generation of photographic styles, which gives you much more granular control over the way your photos will look on the new iPhone 16s, which is a welcome change. However, most of us, myself included, just generally want to snap photos that look pretty good without a whole lot of customization of the style. So it's not going to be that big of a deal for most people, and you do get some customization options on the standard 15s here. It's just not nearly as extensive as it is on the new iPhone at 16 models. But that's really all you're missing out on in terms of the camera department on the standard iPhone 15s here in comparison to the latest standard iPhone 16s. The standard iPhone 15s here have great cameras with really nothing to complain about other than nitpicking these minor things that it lacks. The standard 15s have a very good looking OLED displays with 60Hz display refresh rates, so scrolling and animations won't look quite as smooth on these iPhones in comparison to the Pro tier iPhones that have 120Hz display refresh rates, but the standard iPhone 15 models displays will look plenty smooth and responsive for the vast majority of people. This difference isn't noticeable or even a factor to 99% of iPhone buyers. And of course, you do not get an always-on display option on the standard 15s here, so you're not going to be able to see your lock screen and notifications at all times like you're able to do on the Pro tier iPhones. The standard 15s feature aluminum sides with a frosted back glass design, which does feel quite premium in the hand. As I said earlier, it's nice Apple changed the back glass texture on the latest couple generations of standard iPhones, being the standard 15s here and the latest standard 16s, to the more frosted back glass texture as opposed to the glossy texture that it was on the standard iPhone 14s and earlier. The standard 15s are powered by the A16 chip with 6 gigs of RAM, which packs more than enough power and longevity for pretty much anybody. The standard 15s have a USB-C port for charging and data transfer, which is great. And of course, you don't get the new camera control button that's available on the iPhone 16 models that lets you open up the camera app, take photos, and adjust camera options directly from the button. But as I've said a couple times in this video, this feature doesn't actually bring any new features to the table. It's just a new method to adjust camera options that we've had all along. And you also don't get the customizable action button on the left side of the device. You just have the standard mute ringer switch that we've had all along. It would be nice to have the action button, but it's not a deal breaker by any means. The only noteworthy drawbacks of choosing a standard iPhone 15 over a standard iPhone 16 are no Apple Intelligence support, but again, you could use pretty much all the same features that Apple Intelligence has through the use of third-party applications you could download from the App Store on the iPhone 15 here and every other iPhone. Applications like ChatGPT, Google Photos, and many more apps that deliver, again, all of the same fundamental technologies. Even though it's not built right into iOS, you could still access all of them. You also get a slightly inferior processor chip and less RAM, the standard 15s here, again, being powered by the A16 chip with 6 gigs of RAM, while the latest standard 16s are powered by the new A18 chip with 8 gigs of RAM. And this difference in processing power and less RAM is the reason that Apple Intelligence support is not available on the standard iPhone 15s here. But there's no chance you'd actually notice any difference in performance between the standard iPhone 15s and the standard iPhone 16s doing typical day-to-day tasks. Now, 5 to 7 years down the road, the standard iPhone 15s here might get a year or two less of major software update support than the standard iPhone 16s, due to it having an older processor with less RAM. But chances are you probably won't be using the same phone you're about to buy in 5 to 7 years, so it's probably not worth considering. And the only differences between the 15 and the 15 Plus also come down to size, battery life, and price. Of course, the smaller 15 will be much more pocketable and comfortable to hold, while the larger 15 Plus will be much better for media consumption because of the bigger screen, and it will have much better battery life due to it having a bigger battery. The smaller 15 will still have incredible battery performance that will get the vast majority of people through a day, but again, not as insanely good as the 15 Plus. And in terms of price, we have a $100 difference between these two iPhones, the iPhone 15 is starting at $699, and the iPhone 15 Plus starting at $799, both at 128 gigabytes of storage. So the standard iPhone 15s are a very solid buy in 2025 if you want to save some money and not splurge for a standard 16, as the standard 15s here offer everything that the vast majority of people will need out of an iPhone. They just lack some of the latest features and tech advancements with no big drawbacks. And moving on to the standard tier iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. So we have the iPhone 14, which starts at $599, and we also have the iPhone 14 Plus, which starts at $699. And as you'd expect, we have two display size options for the standard 14s, being the smaller 6.1-inch iPhone 14 and the larger 6.7-inch 14 Plus. And as much as these iPhones are still great to use and have everything that the vast majority of iPhone users would need out of an iPhone, they're getting a bit old to justify purchasing in 2025 at the pretty premium price that Apple is still charging for them. The standard iPhone 14s feature a dual camera system featuring a 12 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens. And photos and videos taken on the standard iPhone 14s look fantastic. However, they're not going to look quite as good as the standard tier iPhone 15 and standard tier iPhone 16, as those newer iPhone generations have a 48 megapixel main camera lens, while the standard iPhone 14s here still have a 12 megapixel camera lens. So when you zoom into a photo that you've already taken, you will notice that there's more sharpness in detail on the newer iPhone generations, but again, largely still looks great. And of course, with the standard iPhone 14 models here, which are a couple generations old, you're going to miss out on some of Apple's very latest and greatest camera tech, similar to what I was talking about with the standard iPhone 15s as well. For example, you don't get the latest generation photographic styles feature that the new iPhone 16 models have, which gives you that very granular control over the way your photos will look, but you still get some controls here on the standard iPhone 14s, just not nearly as extensive. Of course, you don't get the new camera control button that the latest iPhone 16s have that lets you open up the camera app, take photos, and adjust camera options. You don't get the macro photography capability that lets you take super high-res up-close shots, but again, none of these features are essential by any means for most people. So the cameras on the standard iPhone 14s here are still very solid. The standard 14s have great-looking OLED displays with 60 Hz display refresh rates, so scrolling and animations won't look quite as smooth as they do on the Pro tier iPhone models that have 120 Hz display refresh rates, but again, for 99% of people, these displays will look plenty smooth and responsive. Of course, you unfortunately don't get an always-on display option on the standard 14s here, meaning you won't be able to view your lock screen and your notifications at all times. And one of the most noticeable differences between the standard 14s and the newer standard 15s and 16s is the lack of the dynamic island pill-shaped cutout at the top of the screen in the area that's used to store the camera, speaker, and various sensors. On the standard iPhone 14s here, it's just the older notch style, and on the newer iPhones, it's the newer circular dynamic island style. The older notch style on the standard 14s here does look a little bit less premium than the newer cutout style, but it's not anything that you're actually going to be bothered by. These phones feature aluminum sides with a glossy back glass texture, as opposed to the matte texture on the newer standard iPhone 15 and iPhone 16 series. case. Also, the edges of the iPhone 14, where the glass meets the aluminum on both the back and the front, is very squared off, where the newer standard tier iPhone 15 and iPhone 16 series iPhones are a lot more rounded, with the glass slightly curving towards the edge, making the newer standard iPhone 15 and 16s feel a little bit smoother in the hand. So it's a bit of a different feel on the standard 14 series in comparison, but still very premium builds on all of them. But again, both the difference in the back glass texture and the way that the corners feel will probably not be noticed by 99% of people, as most people use a case on their iPhone, as you should. The standard 14s are powered by the A15 chip with 6 gigs of RAM, which packs plenty of power for pretty much any iPhone user. The standard 14s feature a Lightning port for charging and data transfer, which is Apple's proprietary connector that they've used on every recent iPhone up until the iPhone 15 series, which is when they switched to USB-C. So unfortunately, with the standard 14s, you don't get the versatility of being able to charge your phone with the same cable that you probably use to charge up most other tech gadgets in your life, being a USB-C cable. Of course, it's not a huge deal by any means though, just a minor inconvenience. And of course, you don't get Apple Intelligence support on the standard 14s, but again, you can use pretty much all the same features that Apple Intelligence enables through the use of downloading third-party apps from the App Store like ChatGPT, Google Photos, and more. And of course, you don't get the customizable action button here on the standard 14s that you get on the latest standard tier iPhone 16s and 16 Pros. You just have the standard mute ringer switch. And as much as it's nice to have the customizable action button, it's not a deal breaker by any means. The only differences between the 14 and 14 Plus also come down to size, battery life, and price. As you'd expect, the smaller 14 will be more comfortable to hold and more easily pocketable, and of course the larger 14 Plus will be better for media consumption due to it having a larger display, and it will have better battery performance because it has a bigger battery. The 14 will still have a very solid battery performance that'll get most people through a day, but not nearly as good as the 14 Plus. And we have a $100 price difference between these two iPhones. Once again, the iPhone 14 is starting at $599, and the iPhone 14 Plus starting at $699, both at 128 gigabytes of storage. So as much as the standard iPhone 14 models are still great iPhones to use in 2025, I don't recommend buying them new from Apple, just because the entry-level price of $599 for the iPhone 14 and $699 for the iPhone 14 Plus is just too much of a premium amount of money to invest in a product that's already over 2 years old. Of course, they'll continue to work perfectly fine for a good several more years. However, as the years go by, a lot of the attributes about the standard 14 that are currently perceived as minor drawbacks, like the 12 megapixel main camera lens that has a little bit less quality than the newer generation iPhone's 48 megapixel main camera lenses, into having the slightly older A15 processor, and the fact that it has a Lightning port instead of a USB-C port, and similar drawbacks might start to stick out a little bit more as the years go by. I think if you're already prepared to invest a premium amount of money, like $599, to get, again, an iPhone that's 2 generations old, I think at that point it's worth spending an extra $100 to get a standard iPhone 15 model instead. That way you're only getting last year's model that has a decent amount of improvements rather than getting the 2-year-old model that, again, is starting to have some things that 2-3 years down the road might start to stick out a little bit more. I'd say if you're going to buy any iPhone that's older than the iPhone 15 series, I'd recommend getting it on the used market. You could get a standard tier iPhone 14 in the used market for hundreds of dollars less than it costs to get a new one, which is a much more fair amount of money to pay for this device in 2025. And next, we have the iPhone SE 3rd generation, which is the cheapest iPhone Apple currently sells at $429. And I cannot stress this enough, this is an iPhone that absolutely nobody should buy right now, as according to a lot of reliable rumors, Apple's next generation iPhone SE 4th generation is right around the corner, expected to be released in early 2025, most likely around March, which will replace the current iPhone SE 3rd generation within the lineup and bring a ton of incredible improvements to the iPhone SE line. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the current iPhone SE 3rd generation. It stands out quite a bit in comparison to every other iPhone Apple is currently selling, as it features the old iPhone 8 style design with a home button and very large bezels on the top and bottom of the screen, and a much smaller 4.7-inch display. And that single main 12 megapixel camera lens on the back is actually a very solid camera for average phone users. Photos and videos look fantastic, as you can see. Apple's image and video processing do wonders even on their cheapest iPhone offering. But since you only get the one main lens, you don't get a whole lot of control in terms of the zoom level or different optical levels, but the target demographic for this phone is not for people that care about having that. The iPhone SE 3rd Gen features an LCD display with a 60Hz display refresh rate, so you don't get the higher end OLED display technology that every other iPhone Apple is currently selling has. OLED displays produce a sharper image with better viewing angles, deeper black values, and improved power efficiency. But the lack of an OLED panel isn't the primary issue that most people have with the iPhone SE 3rd Gen's display. It actually looks quite good, all things considered. It's just the fact that it is 4.7 inches, which is absolutely tiny by 2025 standards. Now, there's definitely a subset of people out there who prefer a smaller phone with a smaller screen, but that clearly isn't the vast majority of people. And of course, you don't get an always-on display with the iPhone SE 3rd Gen. It's powered by the A15 chip, and it has 4 gigs of RAM, and it runs quite well in 2025. The other massive downside to the iPhone SE 3rd Gen is the battery life. Since this is such a compact and thin phone, the battery is also tiny by 2025 standards, resulting in significantly worse battery performance than any other iPhone Apple is currently selling. There's a chance you might make it through the day with this phone if you're a lighter or more medium smartphone user, but if you're on the heavier side of typical usage, you very likely will not make it through the day with the iPhone SE 3rd Gen. And it features a Lightning port for charging and data transfer. And of course, you don't get the camera control button or the action button with the iPhone SE 3rd Gen. So circling back to what I was saying earlier, do not buy the iPhone SE 3rd Gen right now, as Apple's next generation iPhone SE 4th Gen is right around the corner, and it's going to be a game changer for the iPhone SE line. It's rumored to have a 6.1-inch OLED display, which is the same display tech and size as the standard tier iPhone 16, 15, and 14. Much better battery life thanks to it being much bigger now. Apple's latest A18 chip, most likely with 8 gigs of RAM, and it will have full Apple Intelligence support, USB-C, and more. It sounds like the only real downside to this phone will be the fact that it will still only have one main camera lens on the back, but most people don't need multiple camera lenses for typical usage. And the rumored price for the upcoming iPhone SE 4th Gen is still going to be under $500, so not to talk too much about a product that doesn't even exist yet, but it sounds like the iPhone SE 4th Gen is going to be a crazy good value iPhone. And when you compare it to the existing iPhone SE 3rd Gen, it's going to completely blow it out of the water. So spending $429 on the iPhone SE 3rd Gen has honestly always been a little bit questionable if you ask me, but especially right now with the iPhone SE 4th Gen right around the corner and it being such a big upgrade, again, do not buy an iPhone SE 3rd Gen right now. So guys, at the end of the day, I believe the standard tier iPhone 16 models are the best overall value iPhones to buy in 2025, as they feature everything that the average user will ever need out of their iPhone for under $1,000. Again, with the iPhone 16 starting at $799 and the larger iPhone 16 Plus starting at $899, both for 128 gigabytes of storage. Now, if these are out of your price range, the next best option is definitely the standard tier iPhone 15 models, as they also feature everything that the average user would ever want out of their iPhone, just lacking a few of the latest features and tech advancements for $100 less than it costs to get the standard tier iPhone 16 models. Once again, the iPhone 15 is starting at $699 and the iPhone 15 Plus starting at $799. Also both for 128 gigabytes of storage. And as I said earlier, I don't recommend buying either of the standard tier iPhone 14 models new from Apple, as they're priced too high at $599 for the 14 and $699 for the 14 Plus, considering they're 2 generations old. Even though the standard iPhone 14s are still great iPhones to use, if you're going to buy any iPhone generation older than the 15 series, I'd recommend getting it in the used market for considerably cheaper, as I generally don't recommend paying a premium price for tech that's over 2 years old. And guys, that just about wraps it up for this video. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know down below in the comments which iPhone you're currently using, and if you're considering upgrading to a new iPhone, let me know which iPhone you're considering upgrading to. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you all so much for the tremendous support throughout 2024. It's been a big year for the channel, and I just really appreciate you guys showing up, watching these videos. It means the world to me, and I look forward to making many more videos in 2025. So, Happy New Year to you, and I'll catch you in the next one.